And welcome to Lone Star Yell Fight, where your favorite Aggie, Andy Tom Chesson, and your favorite Longhorn, James Christopher, take you deep inside the two flagship programs of Texas football.
Welcome to your end of December, mid-December version of Lone Star Yell and Fight. It's a tale of two teams and two programs that are possibly heading in different directions, certainly for the next couple of weeks. I'm Andy Tom Chesson. That's James Christopher. We are here with all of the recruiting and signing day recap, early signing day recap for both the Texas Longhorns, who reside in what we call Sodom on the Gomorrah, and your fighting Texas Aggies, who I don't know if they remember there was a signing day yesterday. They might not have.
I
So
mean, they didn't have a bad day.
No, you didn't have a bad day. And I think this is just the reality of a number of things coming to a head. The main one, which is changing coaches in the current climate. You change a head coach. Recruiting, high school recruiting is still about relationships. And so you've got a guy who's been in seat for 3.5 weeks. It's hard to build those relationships in 3.5 weeks, no matter how great a recruiter, great a coach you are or may be. And so you suffer from that a little bit. The good thing is that our 5 stars didn't sign anywhere else. The bad thing is they didn't sign with us yet. They're still committed in theory.
Right.
But they are taking a wait and see approach, which, if I'm Terry Bussey, I can't really, I would be doing the same thing because I want to know who my defensive coordinator is. What scheme are you going to be running? How does that highlight me? All those things, because otherwise I'm committing to a school and I'll probably be in the transfer portal 3 months later. We've seen that.
Right.
It's better news in Austin. You had 22 signees, 22 people committed to your class. All 22 signed yesterday, including 4 5 stars. I think it was 6 4 stars and like 12 12 3 stars. So a good class that seemed to hit a lot of the needs. For you, what was your take on the Longhorns' success yesterday? And I think they're at number 5 right now in
Yeah,
the.
they're sitting at number 5. They it was 22 commits. It was like you said, 4 5 stars as my chair breaks, 15 fours, and then some 3 stars. There were a couple of names on there that I'm a little bit more excited than others. I'm real excited about Jarek Gibson, the running back. That apparently he's another every down back guy, and as you've seen, um, Texas has been able to have a consistent run of running backs when we all thought that that eventually that position would kind of run dry. So I love the fact that we've got some more running back talent going. But again, I think it's just an overall good class with anytime you can get a 5 star offensive lineman, you know that you're going to keep some consistency at that position. So 22. So I'm guessing they probably have 3 slots left. I don't know how many they're going to sign this round,
Well,
but
there are no more limits. There are no more limits on cited classes. Those went away before this season. So you could, in theory, sign 85 guys.
85 new guys.
The only number that matters is the 85 scholarships by the time camp opens up in
Yeah.
August. That's the only number that matters now. Which is interesting because, and I want kind of your thoughts on this, but one of the things that caused a lot of inequity in college football in the 60s and early 70s was this idea that there were no scholarship limitations. And so some schools, maybe one of the schools that one of us is a fans of, used to notoriously sign, 50 guys every year just to keep them away from the Arkansas, the A&Ms, the Nebraskas, the Oklahomas of the world, and let them ride the bench and be kings on campus. And every school did that. I'm not just picking on Texas, but if you're going back to a world where there are no limitations on high school recruiting classes, do we get back to that where your blue bloods, especially in the world of Alabama, Michigan, Texas to some extent, USC, if they could ever pull their head out of their ass, just signs 50 guys every year and lets the chips fall where they may?
Maybe because it seems to be one of the defense against the unevenness that the transfer portal causes, where if you do get all these 5 stars in your program, you're not necessarily going to lose institutional knowledge if a couple of them leave, if you still got really talented guys in that slot. So um, I don't know. I mean, I think all of that stuff has to be figured out with the context of the transfer portal. We've talked about that a bunch. Like, it does create so much upheaval. Um, I don't know if one of the solutions for the transfer portal is to limit how many times you can jump into it, but it does seem like I understand the theory of it all and the reason why people should be able to decide where they go, but we're also like, even more so than the way college football already does. Basically, an institution is riding on the whims of an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid. So I think, to answer your question, I think that it can be one of the ways those big programs are able to at least mitigate the initial problems of losing really good talent in the transfer portal. Texas has one of Georgia's wide receivers that probably would have started next year, but instead he came to Texas and he started this year. So maybe I think that might be one of the things you'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I can tell you from my perspective, and I don't think it's just because I knew we'd be taking a smaller class, but this was the first year in a really long time that I wasn't following the signings yesterday morning. Like usually I'll block out a couple hours on my calendar and just watch Twitter roll in or some of the A&M sites roll in with the signings and when letters of intent came in. I kind of just checked it yesterday around 6 o'clock and went, all right, I guess that's what we're doing today.
But that's not just you though. That I think is the problem with 2 days. I think in February when it was one day and it was a day where not a whole lot else was happening, it was just more fun. And now the idea is that you're going to get, like, Texas got most of its class, A&M got about half of its class. I think it makes it all a little anticlimactic. Period. Not just how you think your class is going to go.
Yeah, speaking of A&M, current rankings have us at 17th. We signed 11 or 12 guys yesterday. We still have 4 that are committed technically, but chose not to sign. And we've been more active in the transfer portal than Texas has, but certainly than A&M has been in the Jimbo Fisher era, which is all we have to compare it to so far. And I think there'll be more of those coming as we figure out the comings and goings over this next 2 weeks, because I think the portal closes again on the 2nd of January. And then there's kind of a dead period until the spring transfer period, because we get to do this all again, college football fans. All the people who stick around for this semester, this coming semester, and then don't like what happens in spring practice, get another shot at going into the transfer portal. So if your head's on a little bit of a swivel because you're losing guys you really got emotionally invested in, it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, but stop getting emotionally invested. That's probably your key.
Well, and we've talked about this before, and I don't want to be, heartless about it, because I certainly am emotionally invested in what my college football team does. It is not to the point where I was in my 20s where it was messing up my life for a couple weeks after a loss or something like that. But
Yeah.
yes, I would like my team to win, and I would like them to win meaningful games. But I think what the transfer portal and especially NIL have done, and they are two distinct things, they just happen to hit all at the same time, has kind of, shown us how the sausage is made with college football. Because while it wasn't on top of the table, there were certainly a lot of what you would consider NIL deals below the table. And I don't care what school you think you root for and how virtuous the coaches are, every major college football program participates in that at some level. And I don't know that it still doesn't go on, but I don't know that it has to go on if you can just have a car dealership
Yeah.
or 44 farms promote my stakes and I will NIL you a couple $100,000 over the course of 4 years.
Quinn Ewers is doing one in town for a local insurance guy. And like his whole thing is you dial all fours, and part of the joke is trying to get Quinn Ewers to change his number to 4. So
Is
they're
that
not all they're not all winners.
Yeah, I don't want to name the law firm because I just don't remember it, and I don't want to be wrong. But I think when I was in Austin last, I saw that Texas, the law firm that is doing, they have like 4 or 5 Texas players running through drills in front of a camera. They have the same commercial in Houston with U of H. And I'm wondering at some point, do you compare the bang for the buck? Like, well, if we run the Texas one in the Houston and Dallas markets, that's going to be a much bigger deal for us from a return standpoint, name recognition, or whatever they're trying to get versus what we get from U of H players or SMU players.
I would think so, because I'm not sure that does UH really have alumni that matter? Brian McTaggart?
Tillman Fertitta, I don't know if he's alumni, but he certainly does like to give that school money.
He sure does. He sure does like to give that school money. Yeah, it's a whole thing. What I've also noticed though is that none of the jerseys that a lot of these guys are wearing, like particularly Quinn's in that commercial, it's not quite burnt orange.
No, well, it can't be
Right,
because
exactly. I thought
Texas.
that was yeah.
Well, it's another part of the inequity, right? So if you are a student, if you're a student athlete in Florida, you can, if the school agrees, wear a Florida Gators or a Florida State jersey in your ads. In Texas, they're not allowed to use the school logos. So the U of H commercial is just red jerseys. They're in the practice facility at U of H, but they have to blur out the logos. I've noticed the same thing with the Texas version of this, is that it's a white or burnt orange jersey, but it's not quite the right burnt orange.
It's not quite the right
You
burnt
guys
orange.
have
Yeah.
struggled with over the years anyway.
Yeah.
So it could just be, practice jerseys. These don't
Yeah.
quite work, so use those. But it's an interesting world. And kind of making sense of what's interesting. We mentioned that Texas is currently sitting in the 5th spot. A&M's in the 17th spot. They've got some room to grow.
Yep.
And then there's a school that everybody thought was just going to clean up in recruiting. I was looking at Colorado's rankings this morning, and I went to 247 Sports.
Hold on, got to keep scrolling. I'm on
I went to the
247 now.
composite, and after 50, it says, "Do you want to see more?" So I click that, and then after 75, you have to click more. Do you want to see that? If you get all the way down to 98,
Wow.
Deion Sanders.
So here's some schools that have out Toledo out recruited them. Heck, Colorado State you can't even be the best in Colorado. Charlotte, App State has out recruited them. Miami of Ohio, Liberty,
James Madison.
There you
Georgia
are, number
Southern,
98.
not Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern.
Yeah.
Liberty. Did you mention Liberty?
I mentioned Liberty. I mean, and they just
it's
came.
not just an insurance company. It is an actual college that plays football.
Wow.
But and I guess it's just the emphasis on different things. But Deion Sanders, I think a lot of people expected him to be able to recruit on name alone, and that hasn't worked out. And I know he's a lot heavier into the transfer portal as a philosophy than he will be with high school freshman recruiting, or high school player recruiting. But he only has 6 commits at this point.
How much of that do you think is actually pointing out how, maybe in pun intended, not ready for prime time he is? Where I think it's going to be super easy to recruit out of the transfer portal, right? Versus having to look at a high school kid and see how much they project. Whereas Texas and A&M and all these other schools that matter have recruiting coordinators and recruiting expert on top of recruiting expert, versus kind of being lazy and going to the transfer portal.
I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of mixture of a lot of different circumstances, but I think that there's probably some belief, like maybe you and I had, that Deion Sanders would be able to show up at a kid's house and be Deion Sanders, and a kid would sign because it's Deion Sanders. And I think you're finding that recruiting's hard work, and there's a lot of. I get very frustrated with fans because A&M's in the middle of a coaching search. We've hired a head coach. We're still looking for a defensive coordinator and a wide receivers coach. And you see guys suggest, not only former A&M players or coaches, but guys that come from the NFL. And I think that's fine to an extent, but those guys coming from the NFL have to understand that recruiting is still their lifeblood, whether or not it's high school or portal recruiting, because you're doing it constantly. It's one of the reasons that some coaches that have been tied to our program in the past, Gary Kubiak, who famously went to our high school in the 70s and then matriculated to A&M and was John Elway's backup for over a decade in Denver. When he returned to the coaching ranks, he coached at A&M, I think, for 1, maybe 2 seasons, and then went right back to the NFL because recruiting's hard. And recruiting was hard in 1993 when he was here. It's infinitely harder now. And you've got to have guys that love it. For all of Jimbo's faults at A&M, and there's a lot of them that are coming out now, as they do after you fire a guy, he was really, really good at recruiting and really, really understood how to do that. Sark, even if he's not the best recruiter in the world, has surrounded himself with a recruiting system, a recruiting machine. So it's constantly going. And I think ultimately the teams who are going to be finishing in your playoff race every year are the teams that do a healthy mix of high school recruiting and portal recruiting that's targeted. I don't think that the model that Colorado seems to be going with we'll just get 50 new guys out of the transfer portal every year, is sustainable, because I don't think that you can build on that.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't. How do you build any level of cohesion if you're playing 50 different guys? Spill the tea on that. What are some of the Jimbo stories that are coming out that have you the most kind of perplexed, or do any of them? I mean, it is funny how the dirty laundry always comes out once the change is made.
Well, if we were winning, it wouldn't matter because nobody would talk about it and he'd still be here and everything would be fine because that's what you want to portray. We weren't winning. And I think the things that were most surprising to me, and none of it's illegal or illicit or anything like that, where it's not a Hugh Freeze type situation where you're buying hookers with Ole Miss cell phones. Buy a burner, guy. It's not that they sell them at 7-Eleven.
They literally do. I think they even advertise them as burner phones now. Like they're
Exactly.
not even. Yeah.
So it's not that level of thing, but it's that he preached this idea of, and you can watch the videos of toughness, grit, pride, excellence, integrity, blah 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 blah, and then held different players accountable in different ways, or didn't hold them accountable at all. So you find out a guy like, nothing against the guy, because teenagers and young adults, if given a lot of leash, will do a lot of stupid things.
Yeah.
But you find out guys like Evan Stewart may just not show up to practice for a few days, and it's okay. He still played. Other guys, if they miss a practice, even if it's excused for a class, wouldn't be allowed to play or wouldn't be allowed to practice. You have guys like Walter Nolan who actively were trying to leave the second they got on campus, and nothing was said to curtail that. Nothing was said to make that better. It's just the lack of management when you're preaching discipline and you don't practice discipline within your own team. That's problematic. There's a bunch of that. The other pieces are just how stubborn Jimbo was, and you could see that on the field, but it was
Sure.
also in the back offices from a standpoint of, I can't listen to anybody else. I know how to win. Well, the reality is he knew how to win in 2012 and 2013, and that's great. But football, as we've talked about, college football has moved in a dramatically different direction than what he was used to, and just the inability to adjust, but the inability to take counsel from his coaches that worked for him, or literally anybody else. And so it became this bunker mentality of, I've won before doing this. I know this is how you do it, and the inability to adjust. But when that inability to adjust doesn't produce results, it starts,
Yeah.
spilling over on people.
You go from genius to stodgy old man real quick.
Yeah, but you also alienate coaches on your staff. You make it impossible to hire somebody, so you end up with Bobby Petrino in his fourth life as your offensive coordinator, because you don't want anybody who's going to question you. And some of the stuff coming out is more about cementing that as a thing that actually happened versus something people suspected probably was happening.
How much of it do you think coaches have to basically are coaching scared, that they're afraid that if they do impose any kind of discipline on some of their high ranked recruits, that they will just jump in the transfer portal? Because again, we're talking about kids.
You do, but if you are preaching culture and you do nothing to support the culture, it rings hollow. And I think that you're an educator. I think that that kids, even at 22 years old, but especially at 17 and 18 years old, can, pardon my French, smell bullshit. They
Yeah.
can recognize it when it's happening. They know when you're genuine, and they know when you're feeding them a line. And when your actions don't match your words, that's the first thing that's going to have players checking out and get into this me first kind of mentality, is because the coach isn't holding himself to the same standard. I think that the reality is that you have to hold a Walter Nolan accountable for his attitude. And if you don't, you've basically told 86, 85 other guys on a team or 104 other guys on a roster that you're not accountable for anything. You can do what you want and probably get away with it if you're talented enough. And yes, life works that way sometimes, but if you're trying to build a team that has a very finite goal in a finite window, it doesn't work that way. And I think you
Right.
look at any school of leadership, nobody's going to tell you, hey, it always works out when you treat your better players better. When you treat treat them better, treat everybody else worse, it's going to be great. That's the way and that unfortunately I think is what it got to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
But
yeah,
I
that
think it
makes
is I think it is a fear thing to some extent. But I think if you're Jimbo Fisher and you have literally a 10-year contract making you one of the 10 highest paid coaches in football, what are you afraid of exactly? You lose that player, go recruit another one.
yeah.
And then you've also told the other guys on the team that there is a level of accountability that you have, and nobody's bigger than the team. I think that's the way to go, but I think it's easy to lose sight of that. And you also have no idea what promises are made to these kids during the recruiting process, which I think also muddies things up.
Well, you also have a situation where I think a lot of kids are actually looking for discipline, looking for leadership, and so I think you can't be afraid to impose those things because you are. I mean, we all know that a lot of recruiting comes down to where mom wants the kid to play, and having a coach that's going to hold them accountable is probably pretty high on a lot of those people's priority list.
Yeah, and I would say that if that's not high on the family's priority list, you have to really weigh, is the squeeze worth the juice, so to speak? Because if somebody's very clearly only about what their NIL deal looks like to come to your school,
Yeah.
is that somebody that you can actually build a winning culture around? Because I don't think it is.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of transfer portals and things, we haven't gotten into this yet though, but Malik Murphy transferred, which I think the unwritten thing is that it means that Arch Manning is not. And I was pretty much told that Arch Manning would be transferring if he didn't start next year. By
But
Twitter, I was told by Twitter.
Twitter has lots of opinions, so that's good. Um, I don't think that either one of us thought Arch Manning was going anywhere.
No.
He is a true freshman this year, so in theory, and I don't think he's played in 4 games this year. So in theory, he could be a redshirt freshman next year, if that redshirt thing even matters anymore, because great players stay 3 years or they
Yeah.
transfer out and go somewhere else. I think the Manning family, I think Cooper, Arch's dad, and the whole system around Arch Manning is smart enough to know they're in a good situation that's fairly low pressure and still winning games. So you don't have to be the guy this year. You have an opportunity. And, frankly, Quinn Ewers has not made it through a season unscathed yet. So there's going to be opportunities likely in 2024.
Yeah.
And that it's kind of his game for 2 to 3 years if he wants it that long. But I think there's a lot to learn. I still think there's a huge jump, and there's going to be an even bigger jump going from the Big 12, but there's a huge jump from what is basically 3A New Orleans football, private school, Catholic football. Even though they play a bunch of public schools, and I've heard all of this, I've also watched the film and watched that Arch Manning is the biggest guy on the field when he's playing. It's usually not what you want to see from a quarterback.
Right.
So there was a leap from, a step up in skill set and speed from that to the Big 12. There's going to be a step up in skill set from the Big 12 to playing an SEC schedule next year. And I think I think that the Manning family, and I think Arch Manning's probably smart enough to recognize that.
Yeah, and I also don't think that I can't imagine the whole Manning thing, all the whole Manning camp would make a decision rolling in the dice that Quinn Ewers was going to leave this year. I think they had to know that there was at least a puncher's chance he was going to come back next year. And honestly, Texas fans, if it really did come down to a binary choice between the two of them, you want Quinn in year 3
Well,
going into the
the ones that actually pay attention to what's happening on the field, yes, you want
Yeah.
you want a 3rd-year quarterback starting rather than a guy who has not started a game yet. That would be preferable.
And I was
Um,
arguing I was arguing actually in person with a Longhorn fan who was like, Quinn's coming back, but everybody else is leaving. The team's not going to be any good next year. And I was like, do you honestly think Quinn Ewers is going to risk his draft status on unless he was felt reasonably sure that the talent coming up was going to be equal to what they have right now? No, he's not going to. So quit knee jerk panicking because you're going to lose two
well,
offensive linemen.
I think that, yeah, the expectation that it's a really easy argument, right? Because you're what, 12-1 right now, and you just won your last Big 12 championship. So likely your team is going to be worse next
Right.
year. The record's going to look worse. You play Michigan, you play Georgia. Um, the schedule, the even the bottom part of the schedule is a little bit heavier than getting to play Iowa State and Kansas. And I know those teams have been better the last couple of years than they have been historically. But 10-3 next year, 10-2 isn't a bad record, and it probably gets you in the playoffs
Yeah.
because there's 12 teams there. And yeah, are you losing wide receiver depth? Yes. Is your offensive line going to go through a transition? Yes, because every team does that. Are you losing some meat off your defensive line? Yes. But you just signed the number 5 class in the country. You're going to be able to replenish that. From what I can tell, Texas hasn't even started playing in the transfer portal. I think they've brought in 2 guys, but there's still some room for them to do that as well. And you'll still have guys transfer off of your team after the playoffs are done. That's a thing that's going to happen because it's what happens in this time. But I think Texas, with the schedule they were awarded this coming year, with the talent they have, and with Sark staying out of his way, which historically he has not been able to do. So kudos to him for putting it together this year. I think it's going to be a very favorable entry into the SEC for Texas. Also, I think that A&M is going to be a lot better next year than people give credit for, because I think Elko is a more competent coach than Jimbo Fisher was at this stage in their careers. Yes, we are losing some talent to the transfer portal, but we're not losing near the talent people seem to think that we are. And if some of that talent comes with a shit ton of attitude,
Yeah.
maybe it's addition by subtraction a little bit. I'm not trying to whitewash it. I'd rather have Walter Nolan and Evan Stewart on my team, but it's, I think the attitude matters a lot in college football. I also think that we could have a whole conversation on NIL resource allocation. And if you're having to pay $1 million for one guy, but you can get 2 guys for, $250 each. And I hate that we're talking about this in college football, but it's the
Yeah.
reality. If you've got a finite pool of money and one guy's commanding half of the pool, well, you probably can get 2 or 3 guys for that same amount of money who fill some holes that you have.
Totally.
And I think
Yeah.
you see a lot of that. I think also you're seeing something that's will become more interesting, because I'm curious to see how many other collectives and schools are doing this. And it's not schools. Schools aren't involved in the NIL, excuse me. But Walter Nolan, who everybody listening knows, he's played at A&M the last 2 years. He was the number 1 recruit in the country from 2020, the class of 2022. He's defensive tackle. He's an elite level football player. He also signed a contract with an A&M collective that requires him to do midweek appearances on their behalf. And so it's not as simple for him to just transfer to another school, because
No.
he's still contractually obligated to that collective. So let's say he transfers to Ole Miss, which is the current hot rumor. Ole Miss has to buy out his contract.
Right.
And again, if he thinks he's getting $1 million per year or per season, Ole Miss has to come up with that money plus whatever the collective wants to let him out of those midweek in-person things. And as unfair as you might think that is, that's the real world. When you start signing contracts, you have to live up to your end of it.
Right.
And I think you're going to see some of the higher end players, there's going to be more of that. And it's kind of an interesting test case to see how this transfer period works out. Chase Bisonatis was an offensive tackle that we have under a similar agreement, went in the transfer portal, came back 2 weeks later.
The grass isn't always greener, man, I guess. Right?
or the schools aren't willing to pay what you think you're worth, which
Yeah.
is another little reality kicker there.
Yeah.
But
So I guess
it's interesting times, man.
it does. And it leads us to our bowl games. A&M, Oklahoma State. How much is that going to matter to things like transfer portal, um, making an impression on the recruits that are unsigned, or does it at all because you're going to see a completely different team in spring practice?
I think spring practice will have a whole lot more bearing than a bowl game played at 8 o'clock at night, 7 days from now, in the middle of the post Christmas, pre New Year's, whatever people do. It's a bowl game. They didn't mean a whole lot 10 years ago. They mean even less in 2023.
Yeah.
I have no idea which Oklahoma State team is showing up because their best running back is in the transfer portal. I have no idea if he's staying or going. We don't know I mean, I know who the head coach is. I don't know who's calling defense. I don't know who's calling offense. We don't know what players are playing, frankly. I assume everybody who's on the roster that isn't in the transfer portal is playing, but you can't really make that assumption. And it will be a lowly attended game in NRG Stadium on the middle of the night on a Wednesday. It matters not at all, because even if you said all those things weren't true, the coaching staff that's running that team is not the coaching staff who's taking over that team on January 2nd.
Right.
So you'll have a new offensive coordinator in Colin Klein. You'll have a new defensive coordinator who is yet to be named, but supposedly that's happening by the end of this week. You have a new head coach, and there'll be different systems, different philosophies, a new strength and conditioning coach, which every one of them is going to bring new levels. Have you ever, this is one of those fun things for me. Texas has changed strength and conditioning coaches periodically, right?
Yeah.
Don't you hear the same thing every time a new strength and conditioning coach? Oh, he's going to put them through 15 weeks of hell, and they're going to be the leanest, put on 58 pounds of muscle in 3 days, and it's incredible, and that's going to make the difference. And then they go away, and then you get another one who's going to be even better.
It never. I don't even pay attention. Like, I think the last strength and conditioning coach I could name off top of my head at Texas was that Mad Dog guy, mostly because he was there for the golden age or one of the golden ages of Texas football, but also he was real fat.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, and I think A&M had a great signing. They signed Tommy Moffitt, who was a longtime head of the S&C program at LSU. And he got let go when the carpetbagger from Notre Dame came in and just wanted to clean house. It wasn't a performance thing. It's just, I want my own guys, whatever.
there are people listening to the show going, "What in the hell's a carpetbagger?"
Well, they should have paid attention in history class, frankly.
Should have.
That's like people who complain about science. Well, that doesn't make sense. That's because you slept through science class.
Yeah, come on, man.
That's exactly what that is. But I think Tommy Moffitt's a great addition. But the things that are going to he'll be praised for, and the things he'll get dinged for, or get, like a quarterback, too much credit when they win, not enough credit when they lose. The strength and conditioning coach is always going to be that same way. But they are, tone setters for the offseason at least. So I'm encouraged by that signing, but it never fails to amaze me every time you get a new one, how much better and different their version of lifting weights is going to be versus the last guy. We're going to run and be conditioned. Well, shouldn't you have been doing that the whole time?
Shouldn't that be the most basic? Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's always, but you gotta sell it to somebody. And the thing that I keep forgetting is we're old guys, but the newer people coming up haven't heard those cliches before. So maybe they still work on that.
I was talking to somebody yesterday, completely non sequitur, but it's our show, about you can't buy second skin anymore, which was this weird stuff.
Oh, right. You can't?
No, evidently they don't make it or sell it at like Walgreens, because I was looking for it. But basically, if you had a blister or something, it was this roll of gelatin that you would put on top of it. It would help keep dirt out and whatever. But I was trying to explain to somebody what the concept was, and she had no idea, because she's 10 years younger, and even 10 years younger, that wasn't a thing that they used. And I said, well, you're listening to somebody who was given salt tablets instead of water at football practice. So
yeah, when we celebrated, we got Cokes.
Go get some orange slices.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe Longhorns will get some Coke. We'll get Cokes after the Sugar Bowl. They are 4.5 point favorites.
Well, I was gonna say my bowl game is gonna be a big pile of shit that I might watch or at least look at the highlights on YouTube the next day. But Texas has something to play for. You're in a playoff game against Michigan. What are your 4.5 point favorites, as you just said?
No, we've
What
got Washington, not
Oh,
Michigan.
I'm sorry, Washington. You're right. Washington did beat the same Texas team by 21 points last season in the bowl,
Yeah,
with the same quarterback. So, and you're facing a head coach in Washington who has lost 9 games his entire career. Excuse me, 11. And evidently he stays up at night thinking about each one of those 11 losses. So good for him. So what's the general feeling? Where are you at with this game? I know it's still 2.5 weeks away. What are the keys to Texas winning this game and having a different outcome from last year?
well, I don't know that last year has much bearing. We all know that, for example, the best player on the Longhorn football team didn't really play in the bowl game last year. So I feel like it's almost impossible to judge a team's performance on a non-playoff bowl game anymore because lots of players justifiably are making business decisions. They've got the NFL draft coming up. They're not going to risk getting injured. Um, I tend to always go with Vegas, although the Vegas did have the Astros. Yeah, that didn't happen. But my also the thing I keep coming back to is how good was the Pac-10 or Pac-12, whatever it is. And I don't know that Washington, I haven't looked at their whole schedule, but I don't know that they've seen a defense like ours. And if Quinn Ewers matches anything close to what he did against Texas Tech and against OSU, I think they'll be playing for the national championship a week later. And I know Michigan's also a 2 point favorite over Alabama, which I kind of find that weird. But again, mostly because I also don't know how good the Big Ten is, right? So um, I know the Big 12 was sort of tough because I watched it, and obviously the SEC has its reputation. Um, but I feel pretty good about. I think Texas will be able to run the ball, and I think they'll be able to stop the Washington offense.
I was about to look up what 538 said about what you were going to do, but I didn't realize ABC News has bought 538. So never mind.
Oh, that's yeah, they did. Yeah, because as another non sequitur, they quit updating baseball odds about halfway through the season last year. Because
Evidently, they're not doing sports.
yeah, because I was like, how is the Astros still this far behind the Rangers? They've caught them on the projections, and I realized that the big bold this will not be updated anymore after X date.
So boo for progress and acquisitions.
Yeah, boo. As Disney, I guess,
Um,
gets ready to acquire something else.
yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it's an interesting game. Sark has a little bit of a big game reputation, and he's done some things to squash that this year. So it probably will continue. I think Washington is a very very solid team, though. I think Michael Penix is a next generation kind of talent at the college level, at least. I don't know how he projects for the NFL, but he's a very, very good college quarterback, and they run a scheme to make things as simple as possible on him. So I think the big key there for you guys is Tiandre Sweat, and your defense getting to Penix and making him have to work for yardage, which is one of those stupid things that football pronunciators say. Yes, if defense plays well, offense plays bad.
Yeah, and it will be because Texas is if there is a weak spot in the Texas defense, it is the secondary. Now that's been mitigated by having a really dominant pass rush and really just being able to make an offense one-sided. I think the OSU ran for like 9 yards on 20 carries or something like that. So there's there's a recipe for success, I think, but also the offense just feels like it's clicking. And
Yep.
you've now gotten 3 weeks for Xavier Worthy to get better, to get 100%. Because he did some pretty amazing stuff on one leg in those 2 games. Now we could ask why he's still returning punts 28 points up, but that would be a question for Sark at some point.
I still think Sark gets too cute for his own good sometimes, but It is
Yep.
what it is. It'll be, I think that's one of the good things about the 12-game playoff next year too, is that teams aren't going to have to do things for style points quite as much anymore. And so I'm sure that some level Xavier Worthy wants to return putts and wants those punts and wants those opportunities for the highlights. But you don't have to win a game by 50 points anymore to make a case for the committee next year.
Yeah.
You just have to have the wins. And I think even one or two losses isn't going to keep most of the teams that we're talking about out of a playoff next year. So you don't have to take chances by having Xavier Worthy returning punts when you have a game well in hand in the fourth quarter of a game.
Yeah.
Some coaches will still do that.
All
Some
you have to
players,
do is win games unless you're Florida State.
well, that's a whole different conversation that we had last week. The other playoff game, as everybody knows, is Michigan versus Georgia. No, that's wrong. Georgia's not in the playoffs. It's Michigan versus Alabama. Sorry, Georgia. How dare you go undefeated for 2 years and then lose your conference championship game? Also, a team that got squeezed out a little bit. I think there are a lot of people who think Alabama is going to handle Michigan pretty easily,
Except Vegas.
except Vegas. But there's a lot of college football fans that still put I think Nick Saban has some sort of special juju that he can just pull out when he wants to win games. Where are you on that game?
Well, the thing is, again, I don't know how good the Big Ten is. Michigan does look like a relatively is a complete football team. Although I could have argued for them being left out of the playoff because chances are they're going to vacate all those wins anyway. But why not, right? That being said, it's still an Alabama team that had to have a miracle to beat Auburn. So they theoretically really could be a 2-loss Alabama team. I don't know how complete Alabama is, and so I actually do think it will be a repeat of one of the great Rose Bowls of all time, the 2004 Rose Bowl, in which Texas beat Michigan with a 60-yard Dusty Mangum field goal, giving us the preview to the return trip the following year. I think it's Texas Michigan in the national championship game.
I think Dusty Mangum sounds like something that's wrong with your car.
It's also
Your mileage isn't as good as you
or-
wanted. You've got a Dusty Mangum, and we need to get that cleaned out.
Or it's if you carry around a lot of condoms, but you're still a virgin, you've now got a dusty mangum.
We're gonna have to flush your Mangum.
Yeah, yeah.
Need a clean
No,
Mangum.
but I think Texas does get the win, and I think when we have our next episode, we'll be talking about them in the national championship game.
And if that doesn't happen, how long will it be till we record again? August?
No, we'll go the next week. I think. Look, and I know, and it's funny because people that listen to this show and this show only will be like, "Wow, that was like a kind of a shot at Jim." But people will know that if this was the Astro show and we had lost a playoff series, it would be till spring training that we would wait to record again.
That was not a shot at Jim at all. I just have been on the other end of your messaging during games, as you have been on mine.
This is well earned. That's a well earned statement. I'm taking a very excited to be here approach to this. I think to me, it feels like if I had to do another Astros comparison, it's the 05 World Series to me, where by the time I got over how cool it is, we're in the World Series, we've been swept. Like, I just don't. So,
I mean, I think that in a lot of ways that Sark has the program ahead of schedule. It pains me to have to say that as an A&M fan, but he does have the team ahead of schedule from what most people were expecting. So to make the playoffs in your third year, in the last year where it's only 4 teams, that's a big deal, a big feather in the cap for the program. I hate that it happened, but it happened. Happy for you, friend. But I could very much see a fan base that should be kind of happy to be there and proud of the progress, getting really frustrated if things don't go their way in the first bowl game. Or, I mean, and it sucks to lose the championship game. Even though you should be just happy that your team got there and let the chips fall where they may, it's going to suck if you lose sometime in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks.
Yeah, 09 sucked mostly because it was so close to 05 that it was like there was a run going. Yeah, no, and it's going to be a fan base that turns, and it's interesting to me because it's a fan base a lot more like when I look at my own fandom, like the Cowboys, where okay, there is a long-term, reasonable history of success versus when we see our Astros fans get pissy because we're still in the middle of this golden era and there was one stumble. So I do think you're going to see nothing gets more toxic than Longhorn Twitter. Um, I buckle up if you want to check some of that out. So I do think it could get really, really pissy, but um, I think Sark is going to be good at at his guys avoiding the noise and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I think also, for at least the first game, Sark's going to have to do a really good job of getting Quinn Ewers to have a good start instead of a slow start.
Yeah.
Because Ewers has had a kind of a pattern of starting slow in games this year. And if he gets into a quarterback competition with Michael Penix, I don't think that goes well for Texas.
We saw it in Oklahoma. We saw the worst pass he's probably thrown since he's been there was that first interception to the Sooners where it was a slant route to a Sooner cornerback. I don't know, there was a misread on that, but it was one of the worst passes he's ever thrown. And so he can't do that again.
If you get Ewers to have a better than cold start, I think that'd be a big key to, more obvious things. If the quarterback plays well, your team has a better chance of winning.
What we're saying here is if you score more points by the end, you have a really great shot to win.
That's the high level of football analytics you're going to get on this show.
Yeah. Hey, before we get out of here, though, I do got to do a big shout out to the Texas women's volleyball team, back-to-back national championships, and just destroyed Nebraska. The first set was close, and then I think they won sets 2 and 3 by at least 10 points each time. They just went out there and flattened them.
Not only did you beat Nebraska to win a national championship, then one of their better players transferred to Texas the day after.
I did not see that yet.
So
she took the bus with them. She's like, "Hey, wait up."
You literally burnt their fields and then took their women.
Although talking about women's sports, some people might say that as a disparaging remark. I think it's funny and a great historical.
I'm certain that it is. Tis the season.
I
think that's all we have for this week. We'll be back probably right after or right before the playoff game that features Texas, because I don't need to highlight whatever's going to happen in NRG Stadium on the 27th. For Lone Star Yell and Fight, that's James Christopher. I'm Andy Tomchesson, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and yours.
And you and yours. Okay. Oh yeah. I've got 2 computers going, so I keep like trying. Why can't I